Hey there. Today's episode is a solo episode, and I'm going to talk about the new shed I just bought to turn into a studio. Ha! I'm going to share with you my plans for it because I think that's really exciting and I think you might as well. And I'm also going to talk about how I make space to create in a small space. So I had a listener reach out to me and let me know that they would love to hear how I see creative and have the room to be creative in a 400 square foot house because that's what I live in. So we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to talk about finding space for your own creativity, both physical space and mental space. So let's get started. You are listening to the In Kinship podcast, and I am your host, Tina Vandenberg. The In Kinship podcast is a podcast for makers who crave a vibrant, authentic life on their own terms. Today's episode is sponsored by Kinship Handwork. What? That's my business. Yeah, for real. I thought, for goodness sakes, I could sponsor my own podcast. I have cool things to share with you. And I have an exciting thing to share with you that's very time sensitive. So here I am, sponsoring my own podcast. So you may not know this about me, but I own a business teaching women how to sew clothing they love called Kinship Handwork. And in my business, I teach in person in northern Michigan, where I live, or actually all throughout Michigan. I also teach at retreats on Mackinac Island. I have 2 of them a year. And I have online courses and workshops. And I have some new exciting ones coming up for the spring of 2023. And they're going to be in my new work studio. Woo! So exciting. All right, so the point of sponsoring the podcast today, though, is that my spring retreat on Mackinac Island, which is going to be held on April 30th through May 4th, is available for registration right now, but only for the next 5 days. If you're listening to this on the day that it dropped, which is February 23rd, then registration closes for the spring retreat of 2023 on February 28th. As of March 1st, all of our hotel rooms return back to the hotel and are going to be gobbled up by some other eager people who want to visit Mackinac Island. So if you've been considering joining us for the spring retreat, now is the time, truly. And here's what we're going to do at the retreat. The spring retreat is going to focus on cloning ready-to-wear clothing that you already have and love. And the beauty of this is you could have something that you like very much that no longer fits you, or has holes in it, or you wish had a different collar. We're going to be able to clone that garment and make the changes that you want to make to it. And this is the best part. No clothing will be harmed in the process of cloning those pieces. So you'll get time with me to work through how to clone that garment, how to create patterns, and then you'll sew up that pattern and have this garment that we're going to make sure that we fine-tune the fit on. And you can do that with a couple of different pieces if you want to. Depends on how ambitious you are. The retreats themselves are magical. A little bit of mindfulness, circling up with other women, making with our hands, empowering ourselves to dress in the way that we want to. All of that comes together at the retreat. The retreat itself is incredibly intimate. There's only 12 spaces, and I have some surprises up my sleeve for you. Not only do I make you special little things, but also I plan a special night for us as well. So jump on the website, kinshiphandwork.com, kinshiphandwork.com. And under retreats, you'll see both the spring and the fall. The spring one is the one that's going to close here in less than a week. The fall one, you have a little more time if you want to check that one out. Oh, and I should say, I know it's a big deal to make a plan to gift yourself this kind of time and space. So if you have any questions on whether this is a right fit for you, if you have enough experience, if you have too much experience, whatever that might be, please reach out to me, tina@kinshiphandwork.com. And now, back to our show. So a couple of weeks ago, one of the listeners to the podcast reached out to me and had mentioned that they would love to hear about how I stay creative and how I find space to be creative in such a small living area. My little boy and I live in a 400 square foot little house, and we moved here just about 9 months ago or so. Now, I am not new to small living. When I was in my 20s, I had a bookstore, and when I had the bookstore, I converted a very dear friend's shed into a little house. Actually, I called it the Shottage, which was a hybrid between a shed and a cottage. It was 10 by 20. It had a sleeping loft up top, and it was just delightful. I lived there for 2 years and I absolutely adored it. It was back in my 20s, but I have always had an affinity for small spaces. I feel comfortable, I feel safe. I like that in a small space, I can have quality materials and not have that break the bank, right? So I can do work that I love doing and also live in a really beautiful way. So, in all fairness, I have this little space that I've been creating in, but I do have this beautiful little building that I purchased a couple of months ago. So, I have an Amish community near me, and they build these sheds that can become a multitude of different things. So, I bought a shed that was 12 by 20. And by shed, I just mean it's a small wooden building, 12 feet by 20 feet. It has a loft up top. It sort of sounds like that shottage I talked about, didn't it? But it is a wee bit bigger, ironically. And this is going to become sort of a multi-purpose space for me. So, because I do live in a very small house, there are some things that I want to store that I don't want to get rid of. I'm going to talk about curating here in a minute, but there are some things I don't want to not have, but that don't fit in my little place. And things like canning supplies, camping gear, winter gear, Christmas decorations, things like that, right? I'm going to put a floor plan in the show notes because I think that's super fun. And I'm going to do that so you can see it if you want to. So I totally would want to see that. So you open up at the doors and you look to your right, and there's a 6-foot loft on that right hand side. And then on the left hand side, it's open ceiling. So underneath the loft, half of that 12-foot space, because it's 12 foot wide, is going to be storage. I purchased some heavy duty storage shelves, and that's going to be storage for camping gear, canning gear, all that kind of stuff. Then the other half of that space underneath the loft is going to be space for my wee little fella, my boy who's 7 years old. He's going to have a workbench over there and shelving and things like that to store all of his treasures. He's very excited, although I will tell you, he was surprised and slightly disappointed that he didn't get half of the building. So when the building arrived, he and I both rushed out there to look at it. And he's like, Mom, what are you going to do with your half? And I'm like, my half? What are you talking about? And he's like, well, I get half and you get half. And I'm like, whoa, 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 hold on. Well, I am excited to share with you. You're not going to get half, but you're going to get a great corner right over here. And he had to deal with his disappointment. To which I said, there are children in third world countries who don't have a workshop at all, you know. And so he found that to be just as effective as I did when my mom said that to me about clearing my plate. So anyway, the rest of the space, though, is going to be my studio. And on one of the big walls, I have this giant armoire. And right now, this armoire is serving as my closet in my little 400 square foot house. It's monstrous. It's like 4 feet wide by 2 feet deep and probably 7 feet tall. It's heavy as sin. But it's got cupboards down below that have doors. And when you open up those cupboards, my sewing machines fit perfectly in there because that's where they are housed right now. The top portion also has cupboard doors. When you open the cupboard doors, kind of stepped back are shelves. So my plan for this piece is to move it out of the little house because it's really commanding and sort of obnoxious in the little space. It feels like ominous when you walk by it. It's so big. So I'm going to put my fabric on the shelving along with other notions. I'll probably put them into baskets because I like texture and I like natural materials. But I'm going to also take and build myself a cutting table, and it will be hinged to the bottom of that little shelving unit. And when you open up those doors, I can then fold that table down and fold the legs out and have a cutting table. And so then it will be tucked behind the doors when I'm not needing it, but available when I do. So excited for that. How exciting is it that you have a piece of furniture that I actually purchased at a thrift store for like $25 that is going to have a life, sort of easily serve a purpose in my new space. So I'm very excited about that. Then in that space, I'm also going to have this beautiful rocking chair that was gifted to me by a friend. I'm going to reupholster the seat on it. And I'm going to get myself another little armchair. And I have this beautiful round wooden table. And I have some task lighting that's going to go into that little corner. And that corner is going to be for handwork. It's going to be for visiting, obviously. It's probably where I'll do some recording from. All of that. Because you know that I do videos online and I also do the podcast. So the podcast and the videos are all going to happen out there. And I'm going to do live workshops where I'm going to teach you how to sew specific clothing. And that's all going to be in my studio as well. So I'm really excited to have a dedicated space to do that and then be able to shut the doors to the space, come into the house, make dinner, and kind of disconnect from business. Because right now, all business happens on my kitchen table. And I've been doing that for years, but I know that that's not the best plan for me because it's hard for me to disconnect from what I'm doing and shift into non-working Tina. And so you know that it's really important to me to spend the time to know what works well for me. And part of that is having something that signals that one part of my day has ended and another has begun. Okay. Whew, so exciting. Then in the other corner, kind of curling around to the front side again, I'm going to have a counter that has my favorite sewing machine and my serger set up all the time. Oh my God. Listen, I know how lucky I am that this is happening, that I prioritize this in my life. And I acknowledge that. Like, I have coveted something like this for so long. So I'm excited to share it with you. But I also know, like, I'm really sorry if you're like, dang you, I want that too. I get it. I totally get it. So as I come around to the front, then underneath one of the big windows that are in the front of the building, I want a big work table. And by big, I just mean like 2 foot by 4 foot. But I want it to be vintage. I want it to have a patina. I want it to be just like beautiful wood that's got like oil in it and not like motor oil, right? But like the oil from hands. I just want it to be sturdy and beautiful. So that I am on the search for. Everything else I pretty much already have, which is exciting. It's exciting to bring that all in. And then at that work table, I'm going to do all the things. I'll do computer work there. I'll do leather work there. I'll work with rivets and wax canvas there. I'll do little paintings, whatever, right? That'll be the place where a lot of work gets done. And then I have this beautiful chandelier that I purchased at a thrift store. I'm very much a thrifter. So every once in a while, I will collect things that really speak to me. I don't bring a lot home because having an excess amount of stuff stresses me out. But this chandelier I found 2 years ago, and I knew that I wanted it to be somewhere someday. So I have the building, and it needs the electric and insulation and drywall put on the walls, things like that. I will post pictures of that giant armoire I'm talking about, and I will post pictures of the floor plan because I always find that fascinating. And then as I start to put it together, I will also share that on my blog. So my first tips for being creative in a small space, and I would actually just say in any space at all, is to curate what you own. Not only the crafting supplies that you have or the making supplies, however you define your making, your creativity, but also in the things that you own in your home. And now this doesn't mean you have to become a minimalist, right? You can be a maximalist. Absolutely. I just encourage you to make sure that the things that you have in your life, the things that you have in your home, are things that bring you joy, that are either things that have utility or are beautiful or are holding the place for something down the road that you're going to find to replace them with. Like maybe they're not beautiful, but they're useful, and you know that someday you want to replace them with something better. I think that that is a really valuable way to live. And I think that when we know what we have and what we own, especially when it comes to fabric and things, right? Then we are more mindful with what we purchase because I can't tell you how many times I've gone to purchase rivets or something, not realizing I have a bag of 200 sitting at the bottom of a basket, right? So like the more knowledge you have of what you own, the less waste you're going to bring in. And so I suggest that you curate what you have. And I like to be rather brutal about this because having an excess of things makes me stressed out. living in such a small place means that I need to make sure that everything has a place. And I think that that pertains to your making space as well, right? If everything has a place, then you're going to have so much more ease when you want to just kind of jump into making something. You're not going to have to dig through some baskets or some totes to try to find something and not be able to locate it. And I know this could be a little bit of a pipe dream because I continually have to cull. I continually have to clear that stinking kitchen island off, which I had visions of it being clear all the time so that at any moment I could cut vegetables or I could cut out a dress or I could sew up some bags, right? I had this vision that that island was going to be clear all the time. I don't even think it's ever been clear. Like right this minute, as I'm looking around, there are 2 packages of dried fruit and 3 books and a game to go back to the library. There are some markers and a bill that I have to pay and a tablet. And then this sweet little phone holder that my little boy made me that I'm not sure what category it falls into. Because so he made this little phone holder out of K'NEX, and I'm going to put a picture of this in the show notes too. And if you're a parent, you know what K'NEX are, but K'NEX are these plastic kind of stick and cog looking things that you can build things out of. So he built me a phone holder out of K'NEX. And I love it because I love him, right? But it's not particularly good at holding up a phone. And it's not particularly beautiful. So it just kind of floats around the house because I don't have the heart to not have it, but I don't know what to do with it exactly. We're not all perfect at this, for sure. So all of these things are on my kitchen island right now. And I wish that they weren't. But I don't have a great space for them right now. When I moved into the little house, I definitely thought about the flow of my life. Where would I set my keys? Where would I put my coat? How would my boots be arranged, especially in the winter? I live in northern Michigan and we get lots of snow. Where would all of these things have a home so that I didn't get overwhelmed with clutter and I enjoyed my living space being such a small space? And so for me, that meant I purchased some things that I might have made myself in a different life. So like, for instance, I purchased a spice rack that was really streamlined and clean so that I could put all my spices next to the stove. So they were in easy access, but they also still looked pretty neat and orderly. Normally, what I would have done is found some beautiful vintage wooden boxes, stacked them up in this beautiful artistic way, and put my spices in there. And that would have been all right, but I couldn't get quite as many in there. I needed to maximize the space I had and how I was using it. So be really mindful on how you house what you have. That's kind of my tip number 2. Make sure that everything has a space. When I moved my creative making materials into my little house, I couldn't bring it all with me. I have things in storage that are going to get shifted into my new workspace. But I have this vintage wooden accordion sewing box, and all of the things that I need to create something went into that box. My favorite scissors, threads, buttons, elastics, seam rippers, all of those kind of things. And by culling it down to the things that I knew I would need so that if I did a project in my small space, I knew I'd have all the tools I needed, really allowed me to curate, again, going back to that curation, what it is that I own. Now, I have some other tools and materials that went to the storage unit, but I do have to then, like, as I bring them into my new studio space, decide, do these really have a home here? Do I really need them? Because for me, at least, and I know we're all different, but for me, having too many things just clouds my brain and makes me feel a bit stressed out. There's really value for me in clearing out and making mental space as well as physical space. Which brings me to tip number 3, and that is to make mental space to be creative, right? And part of that is also prioritizing your creative ventures. So if you're not creating and instead you're spending 15 or 20 minutes, I don't know, getting lost in social media or doing something else that isn't feeding your soul, prioritizing what it is that you know that you need in your life is a really important thing to do. So several years ago, when I first had my little boy, I had postpartum depression. It wasn't something that I'd ever experienced before. And I didn't even know that that's what it was for a long time. I just knew for about a year and a half, I was underwater. I felt like I was drowning. I felt very strong in being a mom, but in every other way, I felt like I was under the ice and I could see the world, but I couldn't quite see the world clearly. If any of you have suffered from postpartum depression, you know it's a really strange place to find yourself. And at the time, I wasn't creating. I was nursing a brand new baby, and I was becoming a mother at 37, and had to learn how to let go of the very developed adult human that I was. And that's not to say that you can't be the adult human that you are and a mother at the same time. But I believe that for a short time at least, there's that shift and it's hard. And you have to figure out how to exist within that space as both just your unique human and also a human that a little baby was relying upon so strongly. So during that time, I finally sort of hit a brick wall and realized I have to find a group that is making things. I have to find a group that gets me out of the house so that I can't push it aside. I commit to other people so I'm there every week. And so I found a knitting group in my little hometown. And I went to the knitting group every Wednesday. And I held that boundary like it was a lifeline because it was. And I held it even when it was pushed against. And it was pushed against because it was a new boundary. And it was something that, like, well, this is going on. So can't you just skip that this week? Or that's happening. So can't you just skip that this week? It's just this week. And I did sometimes, for sure. But for the rest of the time, I held it strong. And I'm so glad that I did because it helped me feel like a human again, right? It helped me through what was a really difficult time for me and also really lovely, right? Both of those things can be true at one time. Motherhood was absolutely beautiful and life giving, but it was also really hard in those very early years. Nursing with a baby that wasn't sleeping through the night for like a year and a half. It's hard stuff. I held that boundary very strongly. And part of the reason that I could do that at the time was because I couldn't just let it be wishy-washy because I have committed to other people. So if you're struggling to find time to create, I suggest finding a group that you can make things with. So I had this knitting group that I went every week, but then I also developed a makers group and we would get together and people would do whatever they wanted. So like somebody would be doing wood burning, somebody would be knitting, somebody else would be painting. I often brought mending because I love to mend in theory, but I find it really hard to commit to on my own. So my suggestion to you is to create some kind of accountability with other people, at least to get you started, at least to get you back on track to be creative. And I know this won't work for everyone, but I found it to be a really great way to get my creativity back and to also get that community, which was really important to me. So you have to prioritize the need to create. And so that could be, again, creating a group that gives you that accountability to make sure that you show up to create stuff, which sounds crazy, like it should be more effortless, but at least in my own life, I sometimes struggle to have it be effortless if I don't put some boundaries or priorities on myself. And then the other thing is to create mental space to be creative is do the things that you need to take care of your body and to take care of your life so that you have more room to make things. Because we all have space where we waste time because we feel crummy about the way our lives are going, right? So for me, that means if I started every morning with my morning routine, which is a meditation or a journal, maybe a little prayer, and then I did some dancing or some yoga, and then at some point during the day, I also walked, like, wow, I am so set up for success. And I know that isn't directly related to being creative, but for me it is because it's like taking care of the things that crowd my brain and don't allow me to be as vibrant as I want to be. So that's important for me. And then I also love the ideas that James Clear puts out about atomic habits and that pair your creativity up with something you already do, right? So have a trigger. An example of that is if you know that you're going to brush your teeth every night, right? Maybe then right after you brush your teeth, you spend 15 minutes writing in your journal or writing your book or whatever. So then that act of brushing your teeth, which you've already well established in your life, most likely, is then going to trigger the next thing that you want to continually do in your life. And I think that if you can find something to kind of pair up with that, that there's a lot of value in that as well. I also want to talk about the value of trying something brand new. There's something about the excitement that we get in being a brand new learner at something. If you're in the sort of doldrums of creating, see if there's something that sparks your interest that's brand new for you. Because being a brand new learner is exciting. It's also frustrating. I will tell you that right now. It's a frustrating experience when you haven't mastered something and you're still working through that frustrating, like, I can't quite get this, why can't I? Until you can kind of flow into that mastery. But there's also something very exciting about painting your first painting that looks like maybe your son did it, but being so excited about having done something new. So try something new. I think that's a great way to kickstart your creativity as well. So if you are looking to be creative in a small space, I think the biggest key for me is to curate what you own. Curate what you own in general, but also curate what you own in your hobby and be really clear with what you want to work with. Like maybe you don't get to work with all of the markers and pens and paints when you're doing mixed media stuff. Maybe you have just your favorites, and invest in quality stuff so that what you are working with, you love working with. And also then having a space for everything, making sure everything has a home. And that way, when you're ready to work on something, you just bring that little caddy over, or you bring that basket over, or you bring that little accordion vintage sewing box over, right? You bring those things over and they're easy to get to, because if you put too many hurdles in front of you, you're not going to be creative. You're not going to take the time. If your kitchen island is never bloody clear, you're not going to find the time to do the things you want to do. This is definitely a reminder to myself. And then prioritize it. Prioritize it by creating space in your life for it, like making room for your space, making mental room for yourself by taking care of yourself in ways that allow you to be more creative. So those are my suggestions. And again, I'm going to put pictures in the show notes because I think that's very fun. And I can't wait to share with you my journey as I make this art studio in my backyard. That's it for our show. Thanks for listening to the In Kinship podcast. I'm so grateful that you were here. I value the fact that you are spending your time with me. Thank you. Would you do me a big favor? Would you jump on your podcasting app and subscribe to the In Kinship podcast and also leave me a review? And a final word from our sponsor, Kinship Handwork. Yes, my own business. Woo! So remember, if you have any interest at all in that spring retreat, jump on the website right now. You have until February 28th, 2023 to register for the spring retreat, which is going to be held April 30th through May 4th on Mackinac Island in Michigan. We're going to clone some ready-to-wear clothing. We're going to laugh and get deep, move our bodies, and have just the best time. Jump on the website at kinshiphandwork.com. And that's KINSHIPHANDWORK.com. Click on retreats and choose spring retreat.